sections there, and the words will appear on the screen. You can follow along there. Hear now the word of the Lord. The angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochum and said, I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land I swore to give to your ancestors. I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall not make a covenant with the people of this land, but you shall break down their altars. Yet you have disobeyed me. Why have you done this? And I also have said, I will not drive them out before you. They will become traps for you, and their gods will become snares to you. When the angel of the Lord had spoken these things to all the Israelites, the people wept aloud, and they called that place Bochum. There they offered sacrifices to the Lord. After Joshua had dismissed the Israelites, they went to take possession of the land, each to their own inheritance. The people served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him and who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. After that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who had brought them out of Egypt. They aroused the Lord's anger because they forsook him and served Baal and the Ashtoreths. In his anger against Israel, the Lord gave them into the hands of the raiders who plundered them. He sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. Whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them, just as he had sworn to them. They were in great distress. Then the Lord raised up judges, who saved them out of the hands of these raiders. Yet they would not listen to these judges, but prostituted themselves to other gods and worshipped them. They quickly turned from the ways of their ancestors, who had been obedient to the Lord's commands. Whenever the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was with the judge and saved them out of the hands of their enemies as long as the judge lived. For the Lord relented because of their groaning under those who oppressed and afflicted them. But when the judge died, the people returned to ways even more corrupt than those of their ancestors, following other gods and serving and worshiping them. They refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. The Israelites lived among the Canaanites, the Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. They took their daughters in marriage and gave their own daughters to their sons, and served their gods. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They forgot the Lord, their God, and served the Baals and the Ashtoreths. This is the word of the Lord. So chapter 8 of the story starts out in this way. Israel won the battle for the promised land. But that was the easy part. Staying faithful to God was way more difficult. The people won't even stop worshiping idols. Every once in a while, God hands them over to their enemies, hoping to get their attention. When Israel cries out for help, God sends a deliverer. Then everything is fine for a while, until Israel forgets God again. The question is, will God's people ever learn? Will God's people ever learn? If you're to read through the whole book of Judges, or read through the full chapter of chapter 8 in the story, you see that they don't ever really seem to learn. Throughout the book of Judges, we see an endless cycle. The people turn their backs on God, and they worship other gods, the Baals and the Ashtoreths. And God sends other nations to oppress the Israelite people to point out their rebellion. Under the oppression of these other nations, the people cry out to God to deliver them, and God relents. He sends a judge to set them free from their oppression. During the life of that judge, they're able to follow and to serve the Lord. But as soon as the judge passes away, they fall back into the same pattern of sin until God sends another nation to oppress them. This happened with Othniel, Ehud, Deborah, Gideon, Jephthah, Samson, and each of the other judges that are listed in the book. The cycle goes on through the lives of each of the 12 judges, and it lasts for a period of almost 400 years. The Israelites rebel, and God sends another nation to oppress them. The Israelites cry out for mercy, and God sends a judge to rescue them. Only if we're to look closely at the lives of the judges, we'll notice that there's something else going on as well. The judges, it seems, for all the good that they do for the people, they each seem to have a character flaw that gets progressively worse as you go from judge to judge. Now, the first three, Othniel, Ehud, and Deborah, they're all pretty good. But by the time we get to Gideon, we start to see some significant character flaws that stand out. As God calls Gideon, he's very timid. He doubts the Lord's presence with the people. He says, "Pardon me, my Lord," to the angel of the Lord. But if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hands of Midian. Gideon also doubts his own ability. Again, "Pardon me, my Lord, but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least of my family." But for all Gideon's doubt, and all his ways of testing God, where Gideon goes wrong happens after he rescues the people from the Midianites. Unlike the judges who had gone before him, Gideon refuses to lead the people towards the end of his life. He tells them, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you." And not only that, but Gideon's actions confuse the worship of the people, and he leads them further astray. He takes gold from the plunder that they took from the Midianites, and he fashions it into an ephod. He places this ephod in his hometown of Ophrah, and there all of Israel comes and they worship before this golden ephod, and it becomes a snare to Gideon, to his family, and to all of Israel. Now, after Gideon, the story, the chapter of the book that we're reading fast tracks to Samson. But in doing so, it skips over some other significant judges. There's Abimelech, who, while not called a judge, he does lead the people of Israel. And as part of his leadership, one of the things that he does is he puts 69 out of 70 of Gideon's sons to the sword. He kills them so that there's no risk of them leading the people rather than him. After that, he brutally murders all of the inhabitants of the town of Shechem as they hide in a stronghold in a tower there. That he lights fire to this tower and they are all burned to death. Then there's Jephthah, the Gileadite, who's a son of a prostitute. Now he acts honorably as he fights against the Ammonites. But as he goes into battle, as he prepares for battle, he makes this vow to the Lord. He says, "If you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering." Now, it should have come as no surprise to Gideon when his daughter comes running out of the house first to greet him after he wins his victory. After all, she was an only child, and she's the only one in his household who would have come. And so he sticks to his word and he sacrifices her. And then there's Samson. We like to teach the story of Samson in Sunday school as a reminder to our children that God gives strength to his people. That God gives us the ability to accomplish great things in his name. But as we do this, there's much more to the story of Samson that we like to gloss over. You see, Samson in no way lived up to the purity standards set out in the law and commanded at the beginning of the book of Judges. The author of Judges tells the story of an angel appearing to Samson's parents and foretelling his birth and giving instructions of how he's to be raised. And immediately that, we read of the first significant event from Samson's adult life. He goes down to Timnah, and he sees a young Philistine woman there. And when he returns to his father and his mother, he says, I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now get her for me as my wife. He refuses to look for a wife among the Israelite people, and instead demands one from among his Israelite enemies and his oppressors. One who is not living according to the law and who not meets the standards of purity for Israel. And when things don't work out with his first wife the way he hopes they will, Samson flies off in a rage and he murders 30 men and he steals their clothes. Later, after his wife is killed as an act of revenge against him, he goes again to the Philistine people. And he finds himself a prostitute from among the people. And he puts his own life at great risk by staying with her. Now his great strength does save him as he tears down the city gates and he drags them up a hill. But we can't help but wonder if this is really what the Lord intended when he gave Samson his strength. And then again, Samson marries another Philistine woman, Delilah. Now Delilah proves to be Samson's undoing as she wears away at him and convinces him to tell her what he believes is the source of his strength, his long hair. Now the story ends, chapter 8, with Samson's death. And as Samson is the last judge in Israel, this does make sense in one way. But if you're to read the last 4 chapters of the book of Judges, you'd read stories there of increasing brutality and increasing depravity of the people as they sink further and further and further into sin. Throughout the book of Judges, we see a downward spiral of rejection and rebellion of God's people against his law and against him. At the end of the book of Joshua gives the people this command. He says, now then throw away the foreign gods that are among you and yield your hearts to the Lord, the God of Israel. And in response, the people commit. They say, we will serve the Lord, our God, and obey him. But as we've just seen, they do the exact opposite. And their constant rebellion drives a large wedge between them and between their God. And by the end of the book of Judges, it's clear that the people of Israel are no different than the people of the nations that were driven out before them. Rather than to be alike to the nations, they have become just like them. And their worship of God is no different than the way their neighboring nations worship their gods. Now, I have to say at this point that it's hard to stay on this side of the pulpit for so long. We're talking about the context of what's going on in people's lives. I want to move over there and I want to tell you what God's doing in this story, how God is working. But before I do that, I need to bring us into this story. Because honestly, we're not a whole lot different from the Israelite people. No, it's true that we don't worship Baal, that we don't pray in front of the Asherah poles, that we don't make idols of gold to worship, and we don't sacrifice our children to God when he answers our prayer. I'd like to think that we're a little bit more discerning about who we marry and about who we trust with the intimate details of our lives. But I do have to ask the question, how are we serving the gods of our day? What are we giving our lives to that is not God? In Matthew 6, verse 24, Jesus refers to the idol mammon, the love of money, which leads to covetousness. He says, no one can serve 2 masters. Either you hate the one and you love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. The Apostle Paul equates this with greed, which he puts on par with sexual immorality, impurity, lust, and evil desires. Jesus warns us, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in the abundance of our possessions. Materialism, with its pursuit of possessions, of financial independence and security, are probably the biggest obstacles to our spiritual growth today. Our culture pushes us to raise our standards of living for more comfort, for more pleasure, for self-confidence without giving any thought to our Creator. And in the end, we become our own God, deciding what we need and how to live and what really matters. The Apostle Paul gives us this warning. He says, "Do not conform to the pattern of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." In addition to materialism and greed, our world preaches individualism, secularism, and relativism. In a sense, we're taught to look after ourselves because if we don't, we're told no one else will. We're taught that if God exists at all, he has very little to say what goes on in this world. And we're taught that what I understand or what I believe of God can be very different from what you understand or what you believe of God. And we both just need to be okay with that. We need to agree to disagree. And these are attitudes that have crept into our churches as well. We like to change who God is. We focus on God as love. And we forget that God is a God of truth, that God is a God that demands justice. The same God that seems to be offended or when others hurt us somehow seems to tolerate it when we hurt or when we offend others. Like the Israelites in the time of the Judges. We like to change the picture of who God is, and when we change this picture, it's in our own favor. The book of Judges ends with this verse. In those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did as they saw fit. In those days, Israel had no king, and everyone did as they saw fit. Now, in a lot of ways, it doesn't make sense to read these words while standing here. Talking about what God's doing in the story, talking about how he is working in the lives of the people, how he's working in our own lives as well. But the book of Judges does show us what happens when the Israelites turn their backs on God. It shows us what happens when they reject God's way and when they try to go their own way. But there's a lot in the book of Judges that does show God's working in the lives of the Israelites, even when they turn their backs on him. The Israelites may have rejected God, but he never turns his back on them. When the people finally do cry out for mercy, he hears their cries. The Lord acts on their behalf and he sends his Spirit to rescue them. When he sends Othniel, the Spirit of the Lord came on Othniel so that he became Israel's judge. And then the Lord appears to Gideon as he threshed his wheat. And where Gideon's reassured that the Lord is with him and that he is, in the Lord's power, a mighty warrior. And then there's Samson. 3 different times in the story of Samson, we read that the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon Samson. When he killed the lion, when he struck down the 30 Philistines, and when he broke the ropes that bound him as he was being carried off to the Philistine countryside. Even after he tells Delilah what he believes the source of his strength, and he's captured, God, the true source of his strength, allows that strength to return so we can deliver one final blow to the Philistine people. Next week, we're going to turn to the book of Ruth. And as we do, we'll see that the book of Ruth happens during the time of Judges and that God is already working, that he's laying out his plans to bring a king to the people. They will soon have a king that will unite them and will lead them together. But even before the people have a king, in providing these judges, however imperfect as they were, the Lord is already pointing ahead to that one just judge that we have in his Son, Jesus. In Judges 2, verse 10, we read that there's an entire nation that neither knew the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. But as we look at John 14, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you really know me, you will know my Father as well. And from now on, you do know him, and you have seen him. If we want to know what Christ did for us, then we need to look to the table, to the bread, to the wine, to Christ's body, and to his blood that was broken and that was spilled out for us. We need to know that Christ died so that we could know him, and so that we could know the Father. In Philippians 3, the Apostle Paul wrote, I want to know Christ. Yes, to know the power of his resurrection and participation in his sufferings, to become like him in death, and so somehow attaining to the resurrection from the dead. If we want to know Christ, we have to become like him, dying to ourselves, dying to this world, and living our full life in him as our Savior and as our Lord. This means laying down the ways of the world. This means rejecting what the world has to offer and clinging to the grace and the love and the freedom that we have through Christ alone. Let's make that our prayer. Amen. Let's pray. Dear Father God, as we look at the book of Judges, as we look at the lives of the people that lived in that day, Lord, we're quick to condemn the acts of those people and to say that we would never do that. But as we look at our own lives, Lord, we have to see that the sin and the temptation that we fall into day after day, Lord. The gods of our day are different from the gods of the time of Judges, but they are just as deceptive. They're just as misleading, Lord, and they distract us from your Spirit. Help us to see through them, Lord, by the power of your Holy Spirit. Help us to look to Christ and to live our full lives as the way he lived. In your name we pray. Amen.